The Cole mansion stood like a monument carved out of ice, gleaming, vast and lifeless. Its marble floors shone so brightly they reflected the chandeliers above like frozen rivers of light. Yet for Adrian Cole, heir to his father's empire, none of it mattered. He could not see the glitter of wealth, the sweeping staircases, or the paintings worth millions that lined the walls. His world was not built from colors and shapes, but from echoes, textures, and the weight of silence. At 8 years old, an accident had taken his sight, a childhood fire that left scars no one could see, not on his skin, but inside the deepest corners of his memory. Since then, darkness had been his only constant. But it wasn't the darkness itself that haunted him. What cut deepest was the loneliness that came with it. His father, Richard Cole, was a man who measured life in profit margins and power. To him, Adrian's blindness was not tragedy, but weakness, a flaw in the carefully constructed legacy he meant to leave behind. So he built walls of wealth around his son, ensuring Adrian lacked for nothing material, yet stripped him of what he needed most: connection, warmth, love. The staff moved through the halls with precision, like pieces of furniture in motion. They spoke to Adrian with polite distance, never long enough to form a bond, never personal enough to be real. When they set down a glass of water, they did so in silence, never guiding his hand to it. When they walked him across the room, it was mechanical, as if leading a shadow. They were trained not to care, his father's unspoken rule. So Adrian learned to navigate his cage. He memorized the texture of each wall, the spacing between steps, the hollow sound of his cane against the grand hallway's tiles. He knew which floorboards creaked in his bedroom, which curtains carried the faint smell of cedar. These things anchored him, but ill at night he lay awake listening to the empty expanse of silence, a silence so heavy it felt as though the house itself had swallowed him whole. Adrian did not fear the dark. He had lived in it for too long to fear it. What gnawed at him was the thought that he might never be seen again, not by eyes that truly cared. He felt invisible in a world where everyone could see him, but no one really looked. One late afternoon, as the wind pressed against the tall windows and the house settled into its usual cold rhythm, Adrian sat alone in the study. The staff had left him a tray of untouched food, its silver cover gleaming with emptiness. He traced the edge of the table, lost in thought, when he heard something new: footsteps. They weren't like the clipped, hurried steps of the butlers, nor the careful, hushed ones of the maids who avoided disturbing him. These were lighter, steady, almost human. He tilted his head, listening. Whoever it was didn't pause at the doorway, as most did. Instead, the steps moved with quiet confidence, carrying the sound of someone who belonged, yet refused to disappear into the silence. Adrian's lips parted slightly. Something shifted in the air, something he couldn't name, but he felt it. For the first time in years, his heart beat with a strange anticipation. Someone new had entered the cage, and unlike the others, he could already sense this person didn't see him as just the blind heir. Something was about to change, something he could not yet imagine. The morning light spilled across the marble floors, but Adrian knew it only by the warmth pressing faintly against his skin. He sat in the conservatory, his favorite room, where the faint scent of roses and lemon trees softened the sterility of the house. The world around him remained a canvas of black, yet he could map the air itself by sound. The chirp of birds perched on the glass roof, the shuffle of servants moving at a distance, careful never to draw too close. Then came those footsteps again. The same ones from the day before, measured, calm, but unafraid of sound. Whoever it was walked with a rhythm that carried no apology. Adrian turned his head slightly, listening. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," a voice said. The tone struck him immediately. It wasn't brittle like the others, nor heavy with forced politeness. It was warm, direct, with a hint of something he hadn't heard in this house for years: respect. He straightened in his chair. "You're new?" "Yes," she answered. "Destiny Harris. I've just been hired." The name hung in the air like a story in itself. Adrian let it roll on his tongue, quietly repeating it. Destiny. Most staff introduced themselves with clipped efficiency, already detached, but this woman had spoken as though she wanted him to know her, not just her role. He tilted his head. "And what exactly did they tell you about me?" She hesitated, but only for a breath. "That you're Mr. Cole's son, that I'm here to serve the house." Adrian smirked faintly. "Not that I'm blind? That I'm the fragile heir to the empire?" Her reply came without pity. "No, but I noticed." The honesty in her voice startled him. Most tiptoed around the word as though it might shatter him, but she said it with steady acknowledgement, not mockery, not sympathy. He felt the edge of the table with his fingertips, grounding himself in the moment. And you're not afraid of talk. Aim to me like this? Why would I be? She asked gently. Blindness doesn't make you less of a man. The words lodged deep inside him, so unexpected he almost forgot how to respond. For years, the walls of this mansion had echoed only with instructions, commands, and careful silences. But here, standing in his father's house, was someone who spoke to him, not at him. Destiny moved closer, the faint swish of her skirt brushing against the air. Your glass is empty, she said softly. But instead of placing a fresh drink in silence as the others would, she reached for his hand and guided it to the glass. Her fingers were warm, steady, real. Adrian froze, the touch sparking through him. No one had done that in years. He whispered, almost to himself, You don't just leave things for me to find. No, Destiny replied. That feels cruel. A lump rose in his throat. He didn't know why her small gesture cut so deep. From the far corner, he could almost hear the staff whispering, their voices laced with disapproval. To them, she was too bold, a maid who didn't understand her place. But to Adrian, she was the first person in years who hadn't treated him like porcelain or shadow. He leaned back in his chair, hearing her footsteps retreat only slightly, her presence still strong in the room. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel hollow. Adrian couldn't explain it, but something about Destiny Harris unsettled the stillness of his world. Something in him stirred awake, a sense that perhaps he had not been completely abandoned to darkness after all. And though he could not yet see her, he knew in his heart, this woman would change everything. The days that followed unfolded differently than any Adrian could remember. The mansion still groaned with its usual silence, the staff still moved with mechanical efficiency, and his father's voice still thundered like iron when he was home. Yet beneath that cold rhythm, something new stirred, something carried in the sound of a young woman's laugh, in the rhythm of footsteps that refused to vanish into the background. Destiny Harris did not walk like the others. She moved as if she carried her own piece of the world with her, steady, grounded, unashamed. Adrian had grown so used to the staff speaking to him only when necessary that the first time Destiny entered the study humming a melody, he nearly dropped the book he was tracing with his fingertips. You're humming, he said, his tone sharp with surprise. She paused. Is that not allowed? A smile tugged at his lips. It's unexpected. People here usually move like ghosts. Well, she replied, her voice soft but certain. I don't intend to be a ghost. And she wasn't. Over the weeks, she began to fill the empty air around him with stories, vivid pictures painted not in color, but in words. She told him about the children who chased each other through the narrow streets of her neighborhood, their laughter rising like music. She described the corner bakery where warm bread filled the air before sunrise, and how the city smelled like a mix of gasoline, rain, and hope when morning buses roared awake. Adrian would lean forward, drinking in every word. He could see none of it, yet he felt everything. Through Destiny, the world stretched wider than the marble halls of his father's mansion. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling of the conservatory, Destiny guided Adrian's hand to the window pane. The glass was cool, and droplets ran against his fingertips. That's rain, she whispered. I know. It is shy what rain feels like, he said, chuckling softly. Not like this, she replied. Close your eyes and listen. It isn't just falling, it's dancing. He obeyed, and for a moment, the darkness within him shifted. He heard the patter, the rush, the rhythm. He could almost see it, the way water painted the world in silver streaks. His chest ached, not from sadness, but from something he hadn't felt in years. Wonder. Later that night, when the mansion had gone quiet, he confessed something he had never told anyone. I dream of seeing again, he said, his voice low, vulnerable. Not just with my eyes. I want to see with my soul. I want to live beyond this cage. Silence lingered between them. Then Destiny stepped closer. She didn't answer with hollow reassurance. Instead, she lifted his hand and placed it against her own cheek. Her skin was warm, and beneath his fingers, he felt the trail of a tear she hadn't tried to hide. Then see me, she whispered. For a heartbeat, the world shifted. Adrian's chest tightened as a spark, small but undeniable, flashed in the black canvas of his vision. Not shapes, not colors, just a flicker of light, like the faint memory of dawn. He gasped quietly but kept it hidden. He pulled his hand back slowly, unsettled, yet unwilling to let the moment go. Destiny didn't press him. She just stood there, her presence heavy with something unsaid. And for the first time since the accident that stole his sight, Adrian felt the impossible tug at the edges of his reality. Something within him had awakened, and though he did not yet understand it, he knew one thing with certainty. Destiny Harris was more than a maid. She was a key. The storm broke on a Thursday evening, not from the sky, but within the marble walls of the Cole estate. Adrian had been in the garden with Destiny. She had led him to the farthest corner, where roses bloomed in a riot of color he could not see, but could almost imagine from her descriptions. She placed a flower in his hand, guiding his fingers along the velvet petals, describing them as though they were drops of fire frozen in bloom. For a rare moment, Adrian had felt alive, the sun warm on his face, the laughter of a woman beside him, making the silence bearable. It was there, in the middle of that fragile peace, that Richard Cole's voice shattered everything. "What is this?" His words cut the air like a blade. Adrian stiffened. He knew the tone well. It was the voice of a man who built empires by crushing anything that dared resist him. Destiny turned quickly, bowing her head. "Sir, You were only overstepping," Richard snapped. "Your job is to clean, not to play nursemaid. You are here to serve this house, not indulge my son's fantasies." Adrian's jaw tightened. He hated when his father spoke as though he weren't even present. "I asked her to bring me here," he said firmly, his voice trembling but steady. Richard's shoes crunched against the gravel as he drew closer. "You don't know what you're asking for, Adrian. You don't need flowers. You don't need stories. You need discipline. Stop letting her fill your head with nonsense." Something inside Adrian broke loose then, something that had been locked away for years. He stood, shaking, yes, but with a fire that startled even himself. "No, father, you're wrong." The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. Adrian could feel his father's stare, heavy and cold, pressing against him like iron bars. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice dropped, quieter now, more threatening. Adrian clenched the rose stem. In his hand, thorns pricking his skin. "She makes me feel alive. For once, I don't feel like I'm rotting inside this house. She talks to me. She treats me like I matter, not like a broken investment you're ashamed of." Destiny flinched at his words, but she didn't interrupt. Richard's tone hardened. "Do you realize what you're saying? You would choose the attention of a servant over the guidance of your father?" "Yes," Adrian said, the word falling like a stone. The garden went still. Even the birds seemed to quiet. Richard turned his fury on Destiny. "Pack your things. You're finished here." Adrian reached out blindly, grabbing Destiny's wrist before she could move. His grip was desperate, almost frantic. "No. If she goes, I go with her." Richard scoffed, his laughter cruel and sharp. "And where would you go, boy? You can't even walk these streets without stumbling. Don't mistake her kindness for salvation. She'll ruin you." But Adrian held on tighter, his voice breaking. "She's not ruining me. She's saving me." Destiny's hand trembled in his, but she didn't pull away. She stood her ground, her chin lifted, though fear flickered in her eyes. Richard Cole said nothing more. He turned sharply, his footsteps retreating into the house the storm left behind him. But his silence was not surrender. It was a promise of battles yet to come. Adrian stood there, heart pounding, the rose crushed in his fist, blood mingling with its petals. And in that moment, he knew two things. His father would never forgive this defiance, and Destiny Harris was now at the center of a war neither of them had asked for, but one that would decide his future. The house felt different that night, charged, heavy, as though the marble walls themselves carried the echo of Richard Cole's rage. Adrian sat alone in his room, his cane resting by the bed, the faint smell of roses still clinging to his fingers where thorns had pricked him. He had washed the blood away, but the sting remained, a reminder that he had chosen to fight, even if his father thought it foolish. The door creaked open. He didn't need to ask who it was. Destiny's footsteps carried a rhythm he could recognize even in a storm. She closed the door gently behind her, her breath uneven. "You shouldn't be here," Adrian whispered. "And leave you to sit in this silence?" She replied softly. "Not tonight." He turned his head toward the sound of her voice. "He'll fire you." She walked closer until he could feel her presence, steady and unwavering. "Then he'll fire me, but I won't let him lock you deeper into the dark." Her words broke something inside him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. "I'm tired, Destiny. Tired of fighting battles I can't win. Tired of hoping for something I'll never have. Maybe my father's right. Maybe I am broken." Destiny lowered herself to the floor in front of him, her voice trembling but fierce. Don't you dare say that. You are not broken, Adrian. You're breathing, you're fighting. That is not brokenness. That's survival. His chest tightened, raw and aching. But what's the point if this is all I'll ever know? Darkness, emptiness, a cage. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Destiny reached up, gently pulling his hands away from his face. Her palms rested against his cheeks, firm, warm, alive. Then let me show you something, she whispered. He felt her hands slide slowly to cover his eyes, her thumbs brushing lightly across his temples. Her touch was steady, grounding him in a way nothing else ever had. Don't run from this, she said. Close your eyes, not because you have to, but because you choose to. Let yourself feel, Adrian. Let yourself believe there's more than the dark. Her voice broke on the last word, but she didn't let go. And then, something happened. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, like the faint memory of light pressing against closed lids. Adrian gasped, his breath catching. The black canvas of his world stirred, and in it, faint outlines began to form, shadows, shapes, blurred but undeniable. He clutched at Destiny's wrists, his whole body trembling. Wait, His voice cracked. I see something. I see. God, I don't know what it is, but I see. Tears slid down Destiny's face, though he could not yet see them clearly. Then don't let go of it, she whispered. Hold on to it. His chest heaved with sobs he hadn't let himself cry in years. For the first time since the fire stole his sight, there was more than darkness. The impossible had broken through. Not fully, not yet, but enough to shatter the walls of despair. When her hands finally fell away, Adrian sat there trembling, face wet with tears. He couldn't explain it, couldn't understand it, but he knew one thing. Destiny's touch had awakened something no doctor, no medicine, no wealth had ever reached. He reached blindly for her hand, clutching it with desperate gratitude. Don't leave me, he whispered. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole didn't feel entirely lost. He felt as though the world, fragile and broken as it was, had cracked open to let in a sliver of light. The morning after the miracle, the mansion carried a silence that felt different. Not empty, not hollow, but heavy with anticipation. Adrian had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, faint shapes returned to him. Shifting outlines, hints of brightness where there had once been nothing. It was fragile, fleeting, but real, and it had come from her. When Richard Cole returned from his business trip that afternoon, the storm broke again. Adrian sat upright in the drawing room, Destiny by his side, her hand resting gently on his arm as though to anchor him. He could feel his father's gaze like a blade, sharp and cutting. You look different, Richard said coldly. What has she been filling your head with now? Adrian's throat tightened, but he didn't waver. Not filling my head, Father. Opening my eyes. The words hung in the air, absurd enough to draw Richard into a laugh. Your eyes? Adrian, doctors told us years ago it was hopeless. Don't tell me you've let some maid convince you otherwise. But Adrian's hands trembled as he leaned forward. It's not in my head. I'm telling you, I saw something. Light, shapes. It's not perfect, but it's there. I swear it. Richard's face hardened. He turned his fury on Destiny. Enough of this madness. You will not toy with my son's mind. Do you understand? Pack your things. You're finished here. Destiny's breath caught, but before she could move, Adrian's voice rang out, stronger than it had ever been. No, she stays. Richard froze, his jaw clenching. Adrian pressed on, his voice shaking with raw defiance. All your wealth, all your power, all the doctors you bought, they gave me nothing. But she gave me something no one else could. Hope, light, a reason to believe I'm not just a prisoner in your empire. The room seemed to shrink around them. Richard's hands tightened at his sides, his silence seething, but Adrian didn't. Stop. Fire her, and you'll lose me, because I won't stay in this house another day without her. Destiny's fingers tightened on his arm, her breath trembling, but she said nothing. It wasn't her fight to claim. It was his. That evening, Richard relented, not with agreement, but with silence. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt like he had won something. 2 days later, he sat in a doctor's office, Destiny beside him. The sterile smell, the sharp clatter of instruments, the careful hum of machines, it all blurred together as the physician peered into his eyes. When the doctor finally leaned back, his voice was heavy with disbelief. It's impossible, he murmured. There's activity where there shouldn't be. Nerve pathways that were dead appear to be firing again. He shook his head as though refusing to believe his own findings. By every report, you shouldn't be seeing anything, and yet something has changed. Adrian turned his face toward Destiny, tears burning his eyes. He didn't need the doctor's explanation. He already knew the truth. It wasn't medicine that had woken the dormant spark within him. It was touch. It was presence. It was the refusal of one woman to treat him as broken. That evening, as the sun set behind the mansion, Adrian stepped into the garden again. The outlines were still blurred, faint, but as Destiny led him toward the roses, he saw, just barely, the shape of her standing against the light. His voice cracked with wonder. "I see you." Destiny's hand tightened in his, her tears falling freely now. And inside the house, Richard Cole stood at the window, his reflection staring back at him, realizing at last that all his fortune could not buy what this woman had given his son, a life returned, a hope reborn, and a vision that went beyond sight.